Welcome to Athletes OnBalance, where we talk to athletes, coaches, and experts about mental health in sports. This is a stigma-free zone for inner thoughts and outer conversations. We're helping athletes and anyone with mental health challenges perform at their best, on and off the field.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Athletes OnBalance. I'm your host, Walt Norley, the founder and CEO of OnBalance Health. Today, I'm honored to be joined by someone whose life work sits at the powerful intersection of faith, leadership, and student-athlete well-being. Father Rob Hagan, Order of St. Augustine, is the longtime chaplain for Villanova University's football and men's basketball programs. Formerly, for a 20-year period of time, served as the Senior Associate Athletic Director, where he saw all aspects of student-athlete well-being, including sports medicine and strength and conditioning. Now, in his 17th season with Villanova Athletics, he has transitioned to the prior Provincial of the province of St. Thomas of Villanova. A Villanova alum himself, Father Rob earned his JD from Walt University and spent nearly a decade as a criminal defense attorney, which we'll speak towards, before being ordained in 2003. Since then, he's become a steady, compassionate presence for athletes navigating the pressures of athletic demands, academics, and personal health and growth. In this episode, Father Rob and I are going to speak and explore some of the roles of how spirituality and faith has become a prevalent part of the mental health recovery journey and overall well-being. And how faith can offer a grounding force within this often chaotic world of high-performance athletics. Father Rob, I'm excited to have you. Welcome, and thank you for joining.
Thank you, Walt. It's really nice to be with you.
So I thought kind of shape a big picture as we start this out, as you and I have spoken. As you know, from being a significant participant in college athletics, especially modern day, and it's my world now, there is a quote-unquote crisis. I had Dr. Brian Hanline on last week, former chief medical officer for the NCAA. There's a crisis. The crisis is, I guess, from the perspective of trending number of cases that student athletes are in at any given period of time, clinical, non-clinical, sports psychology, as well as, unfortunately, the tragedy of suicide rates. Which not only they actually, as you know, that parallels and unfortunately to students, not just athletes. But so we have some really troubling negative trends. One stat I don't know if I've shared with you that I think is pretty stark, that I've seen this across the country. Anywhere on the low end, at any given period of time, you'll see a university will see 20% up to 50% of student athletes being in some form of a mental health case. So if you have 500 or 600 athletes, you have 125 to 150 to upwards to 175 student athletes that could be in some form of a case. So not trivial, right? What is your perspective on when you look at, you've been so involved in, premier sports at Villanova. What is your perspective of what's evolved from 10 years ago to today?
Well, just, thank you for exploring the topic, because it really couldn't be more important to the well-being of the person than to say, what's going on inside. When you hurt if you break your arm, you break your leg, you got a cast on, and everybody can see what's wrong. When you start talking about mental health, psychological health, spiritual health, it's internal. And so just the fact that we're talking about it and kind of trying to remove the stigma of it is of benefit to everybody involved. And I think, athletics, it just mirrors what's going on in society, right? And so as a society, we've become a very anxious generation. There's fear, worry is at an all-time high, and I'm sure that the doctors and people could weigh in as to why that is. But I can tell you from the student athlete point of view, they are incredibly overscheduled. You're talking about high achieving individuals who want to get it done at a high level on the academic side, on the athletic side. Nutrition is a big deal now. Strength and conditioning is much more at the forefront of things than it was, say 10 or 20 years ago. And so you're talking about the demands on your time. They always have to be somewhere. They always have to be on. There is a tendency to define ourselves by how we perform on the field or in the weight room or in the classroom. And so, to be able to break in there and say, how are you doing? How are you managing all this? And I think a lot of times people think that they're the only one who isn't managing it well. And so, especially with the athletes, you don't want to look bad. You don't want to appear to be weak. You don't want your can't get it done. And so what happens is a lot of people are suffering in silence. You've heard it said before, be kind to people, because everybody you meet is fighting a battle within themselves that you know nothing about. And so I think, programs like this and that the culture on college campuses now, counseling, health center, spiritual assistance, it's a lot more at the forefront of things now, because hopefully some of that stigma is going away. It's not completely gone away because people still are concerned about how they are perceived. But there are resources out there now. And I think the important thing is for, if you're a strength coach, or if you're an assistant coach, or you're a teacher, or you're somebody on campus that might not be the PhD with all the psychological, clinical work, still point someone to resources where they can get the help that they need, or even simply ask the question, hey, are you doing okay? Because a lot of people won't volunteer that information, but they will if they sense that you care.
You make some really interesting points, and some of them are, they're broad. I mean, this is, again, it's not Villanova University, as you know, it's a national situation, and my exposure has been there's entities that are handling it well. I mean, obviously, economics matter in terms of resources, both at the university level as well as at the athletic department level, and we've got some challenges going on with budgets as the world changes with this lawsuit settlement and the allotment of that for NIL. But you mentioned a word that I think is really important, and I'll speak to it broadly as you did, and that's culture. Culture that you have, it really, quite frankly, Father Rob, it's no different than, a business culture, a school culture, a team culture, right? And then a community culture within the world of religion, within, your particular university. To talk about culture a little bit, because, you have the broad university and then you have the layers underneath it. And what's important in that culture in terms of consistency, so that student or that student athlete feels safe, if you will, to seek help or to have conversation?
Well, I think it's a great point, and I think it's always been a great point, but particularly now in the world of NIL, because if we're not careful here, student athletes are just going to be led to go to the highest bidder. Who's offering me the most money? And I think we can all agree that they are entitled to make money and they should be compensated. The pendulum has swung the other way. And I think people are on board with the fact that these student athletes are entitled to compensation. But that doesn't mean that that's all that they need. And so I think if you're a coach or you're a school these days and you're recruiting, you had better be selling your culture as much as the paycheck.
Right.
People are human beings, and they want to feel a sense of belonging, and they want to feel like they're part of something bigger than just themselves. And they want to feel like the people are invested in them as people, And you've heard it said before about coaches and teachers. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so a culture of caring, a culture of community. Some of the best teams, and I know you were a student athlete yourself, Walt, and you think about teams that you were on, and successful teams were not necessarily the group with the most talent, but often it was the group that felt the most connected,
Right.
that they were supported and part of each other, whether you were a walk-on, a manager, the kid that did the laundry, or the guy that scored all the points.
Right.
And so I think that's incumbent upon, obviously, the head coach, but the staff, and then the support staff around the team and at the university, to create an environment where people feel cared for. And you know that experience when you think about different motivators. You can be motivated out of fear, you can be motivated out of compensation, but I would argue, and faith component would attest to this, that the great motivator of all time is love. When you play for the people that came before you, when you play for each other, when you love each other, that is an incredible force. That's an incredible bond that goes beyond, what the score says. And people will do loving things when you're in that environment. You'll hold somebody accountable. You'll say, "Hey, look, you look depressed. You're partying too much.
Right.
I think you're smoking too much weed.
Right.
I think we got to talk to let's talk about the counselor. Have you met my pastor?"
Right.
And have the connectivity to your teammates that goes beyond what everybody's getting paid, in that culture of community, that culture of caring that says we're going to hold each other accountable. We're doing this with each other and for each other. And that's a powerful force.
So you mentioned some really interesting things here, within culture, with love, because, doesn't matter what your background is, doesn't matter really what your religious background is, and doesn't matter what your political background is, race, creed, color, etc. And, love is that common denominator. So that's really, really well said, and thank you for saying that. But go back to something you said a little bit earlier about the DNA of the student athletes that exist at really at every level, right? It's not just D1, high, D2. I mean, student athletes that are in the collegiate world, they're competitive human beings, they're ambitious human beings, they're disciplined human beings typically, and obviously they have athletic talent. But all the stresses and strains, NIL, I mean, look, I talked to, Father Rob, I talked to athletic directors about this in my world. Everybody's gotten to a transactional. All of a sudden, we're in a transactional world. Coaches are in a transactional world. 17, 18, 19-year-old, 20-year-olds are in transactional. It's almost like I'm a stockbroker and I'm making deals. I'm trading, right? I'm trading for economics right now, and the asset's me, right? I mean, it's almost unfathomable, but within that DNA and these new pressures of NIL, transfer portal, one of the things that we see as a disorder, actually, I'm sure you know this, is what they call transition adjustment, right? So great, somebody's hopping from school to A to B and he's making X amount of money, but guess what? There's a transition and an adjustment that they struggle with. And that leads to what you said, and that's culture. So, and that's a sense of what you also said, which is community. So now let's take that to what's going on right now. So I'm very impressed, honestly, of what's going on in this faith-based world in athletics right now. The fact that it's coming to the forefront, not, in the back. Fellowship of Christian Athletes has been out there since when I played ball, right? And I had teammates both at Ohio State and Georgia that were heavily involved in that whole world. And I thought that was a great thing then. But guess what? It was a small portion, back in the 80s. It was a small portion of a 90-person, 100-person team. I know that program still exists. So why do you think that faith is now to the point where it's an element of the community, the bonding that they have as a team to be able to work through some of these challenges that you mentioned?
Well, you think about a student athlete and how competitive they are, and to get to the level that they get to in, let's say Division 1, or really at any level. um, you've developed not just your body, but your mind, your weaknesses. You've worked on a lot of aspects of your whole self to get to that level. And so, I think when you look at people who are say struggling mentally, or just want to be their best selves, why would you leave that tool out of the toolbox? Right. If we are mind, body, and spirit, why would you just work on one or two and not all three? And so I think what's happened now in this, I would say, crisis of anxiety, that people are realizing that a faith dimension, a relationship with your higher power, understanding that you are created for a purpose, that adds a kind of interior confidence and peace that affects how you perform. And you talked about adjustment, and I think that's a very critical piece here, because as you ascend as an athlete, you're at the top of Little League, and then you're a star in high school. But as you know, every time you go to the next level, it gets harder and harder, and the level of competition gets steeper and steeper. And so if you're not careful, and athletes do this all the time, I think people do it all the time, we define ourselves by our success. So now you come out of high school and you're on the football team, and everybody to your left and to your right was a star as well. And so now you're not starting, or you're not getting the ball, or you're not getting as many opportunities, or when you do get an opportunity, you don't perform well. Well, that can send a lot of these kids into a form of depression. Right. They start to define themselves by that. What the faith says, and like you said, it doesn't matter what faith you really come from. But, we believe a kind of a universal principle that we're all created in the image and likeness of God. By virtue of the fact that you're created by your higher power, you have value. And so we're not going to define you because you didn't score that many touchdowns this year, or you couldn't bench press as much as the guy next to you. And a healthy competition and a healthy drive to get better is good, but losing your self-identity in the process is not. And so I think the faith dimension helps you remember who you are, that what your gifts are, and starts to incorporate certain values like patience. Patience isn't the most Googled word these days because nobody wants to wait for anything. When you and I were growing up, we wanted to hear our favorite song. We had to wait for it to come on the radio.
Right.
Now you just
Casey
download
Kasem's Top 40 on Saturday.
On demand.
Right.
On demand movie, on demand Netflix. Nobody's going to wait. And as student athletes, as entrepreneurs, that you're not always your best, in the first semester and in the first season. And to allow yourself the patience and the perseverance to work and fall and fail and get up and get better. But, that takes resilience. That takes an ability to forgive yourself. That takes an ability to kind of patiently move forward and not expect it all to happen right away. And so the conversations that I've been privileged to have with many of the student athletes that I've encountered is right around those values. Hey, you're good, and you're not a finished product. And it's okay not to be at the finish line when you start. And, if so-and-so is a little stronger than you or a little bit ahead of you at this point, or you screwed up in the last practice, or you're not starting right now, that's okay. Michael Jordan was cut from his high school team, and we can give example after example about highly professional people that we all, hold up and recognize, and they can point to you about failures and setbacks that they had in their life. And the key is not so much, not falling, but the ability to get back up. Right. And it's not so much what we achieve in life as what we overcome. And so what are the qualities? What are your go-tos when you need to overcome an obstacle in your life? And faith certainly is one of those tools in your toolbox.
Well, I'm going to go back because it actually ties in really well with a lot of things you're saying, and that is when I said earlier about the percentages of student athletes that might be in some form of a non-clinical clinical case at any given period of time, and so that culture is the low numbers is what I've been exposed to is because the student athletes don't necessarily feel safe and not to be judged by a coach or a teammate or somebody within that stakeholder group. So, and so the culture isn't there for somebody to go get their knee fixed as soon as it's bothering them. They're hesitant because of the stigma associated, et cetera. So they don't feel safe. The higher percentages where they have more, it's not because there are more student athletes that are really challenged at that one university. It's because they have a different culture. They have a different culture, right? So there's an allowance. You're no different than your knee and your shoulder. Go get help. It's okay, right? Mind, body, spirit, as you said. Now, going through that athlete DNA that you talked about and feeling safe, and now somebody that is looking for something that makes them feel better from the standpoint of we'll use two words. We'll use the spiritual word and we'll use the faith word. And my simplistic mind faith goes more towards religion, and spiritual can be, from the environment, the ocean, the trees, et cetera. But how do we get that student athlete who already has that competitive thing, already has the sensitivity, how do we get them educated that faith relationship is there to create well-being?
I think it's important to have good role models, mentors. I was blown away as a lot of my faith friends were around the football playoff. Those four teams competed, as the microphone was put in, some of these young men's faces to talk about their experience. How many of them just right off the bat referenced their gratitude to God for the opportunity, their faith in Jesus Christ, the spirit that they were given in their family. There's just a deference, a gratitude, a humility, if you will, to understand that we don't have all the strength, and we can take strength from others and from our Creator. And I just think that when you can point to, I think one of the aspects of your the beautiful website that you have on OnBalance is actual testimonials of people who have gone through an experience and how they've overcome. And so to be able to look up to somebody that maybe has experienced this, and can identify with you, I think that's how the word spreads. I will tell you, in the many times that we've had to intervene with somebody who was struggling, often it was not the person themselves that came forward, but it was a teammate who reached out and said, hey, my roommate or my friend on the team is struggling. Right. And that is a wonderful culture to promote. Right. To say, hey, don't be afraid to put your hand up, but also don't be afraid to refer, somebody that that's not saying anything to someone that might be able to get some help. There was a recent Wall Street Journal article that I saw about companies that are interviewing prospective students for employee as an employee. And the question that you would typically ask in an interview was like, tell me about yourself, right? They have swapped out that question. And now they are asking, tell me something you've had to overcome. Because the understanding is that there's a generation between COVID and just anxiety and the difficult obstacles that people have had to go through is, do we have somebody who has the resilience to overcome these setbacks? And so to be able to look through the story of your own life and say, when was I knocked down and how did I get up and to whom did I turn and who helped me get up? And often those experiences are full of, somebody reached out. Somebody encouraged me to seek out a counselor, or somebody encouraged me to explore my faith and my relationship with God. And it's in those moments that you go back and say, wow, that's how I got through that time. That's how I'll get through this one.
So, it occurs to me that, again, going to this world of struggle and the mentality that you described about, it's not all about necessarily where you are in the depth chart, how well you played the last game. Don't let that define you, right? It ends up being an identity as a human being. But in the mental health world, when people are struggling during this season for anxiety or for adjustment disorders, depression, it's, you've got acute management. So when you're in acute, you've got two worlds here, Father Rob. You've got the acute situation and trying to get somebody well enough so they can, let's go to athletics, so they can compete, right, at an expected level. And then you've got the well-being of the human being, right, that well-being of the person that you're defining. Where do we bring in, and I guess it goes to culture and community. I would obviously at Villanova University, that's a thread that's just there, right?
It is. We're blessed, Walt, and I know a lot of schools have it, so we don't have a monopoly on community. But I think maybe by virtue of our size, it's not huge, so you're not going to get lost. I think sometimes in life we can feel like just a number, and where nobody sees us. I think in our culture, in our community, you are seen, and then I think part of it is our mission. That we would say our mission at Villanova, and again, and I'm sure at a lot of places, is kind of the golden rule. Love your neighbor as yourself. That we have a certain responsibility to care about and pay attention to the people around us. And so I think when you encourage that, when you recruit for that, then that creates an environment where things are going to get picked up. And so, look, maybe you're having a bad day and you miss a lift. It happens to all of us. But when you have a culture of community, a culture of caring where, hey, the strength coach says to the trainer, hey, so-and-so's just missed three lifts in a row. And the trainer says, yeah, I haven't seen him for stretch either. And, the academic support mentor says, it hasn't shown up for study hall either. And it was because people were paying attention that you start to recognize somebody who's falling through the cracks before they fall all the way over the edge. Because people were paying attention, because people are encouraged to care. It's not just like an extra. It's part of our responsibility. It's part of your job as a teammate, as a captain, as a classmate, to pay attention to your sister, your brother. And I think, you mentioned earlier about, suicide. That is the greatest path to peace and to help is when somebody else noticed and wasn't afraid to intervene and say, hey, look, you don't look like you're doing great. And the person was almost relieved because you asked. Because the first time when you ask, you say, well, how you doing? And they say, oh, I'm fine.
Right.
But you're not content to settle on that answer and to go a little bit deeper because you care and you can get to the bottom of something when, otherwise it could have been unattended because the people just felt like, well, I don't want to be a bother and I don't want to bring this up and nobody really cares anyway.
Right. And well, that kind of goes to your world of community, and because I think that's what I'm impressed about, the bond of faith within that community. And keep the sports for the time being, that the bond of what happened for the Ohio State football team as they had a crushing defeat against, their arch rival Michigan. Everybody's talking about, getting rid of the coach and, what happened. I mean, it was, and then they go on this run, as you know, win 4 amazing games and become national champions and, look like one of the better teams that's played at that level for a long time. And then we find out, when all that's said and done, that one of the ways that they were able to come together and pick themselves off the carpet, if you will, was that they grabbed a faith that took themselves out of their individual, I'll call it selfishness, and reflection about them as an individual, how many passes they catch, et cetera, to have that as a common bond. And I think that's remarkable. It's one example of many, right? I mean, you have more stories probably than I do. But what a beautiful thing that community in particular brought people together to have success for a common goal.
It's incredible. I think it's one of the great gifts, Walt, of being a part of a team. I don't care if you're, in Little League or, Ohio State national champions or your neighborhood softball league.
Right.
To be a part of a team with a common goal, and to come together and to support one another and to pay attention to each other. There's really nothing better. And we like to say, nobody goes through life undefeated. Everybody's going to screw it up. There's 2 kinds of people in this world, those who are humble and those who are going to be. Everybody's humbled. Everybody makes a mistake. Everybody loses. Everybody fumbles. Everybody on some level screws it up. And to have people around you who don't judge. We're all afraid about being judged. We're all afraid about looking bad. Everybody wants to have their digital presence where everything looks perfect and successful. But we all know that life isn't that way. And, you mentioned people like Nick Saban and Jay Wright and coaches who they know failure.
Right.
And that's what makes them great.
Right.
And to be able to not judge a player or a teammate or a student athlete for making a mistake, but how do we use it? What did we learn from it?
Right.
And then how do we grow? We won that first national championship in 2016 at Villanova. And in 2015, those same guys were in tears in the locker room after the first weekend when we lost. And that did something to us. It galvanized us. They worked a little bit harder, I think, that following summer. There's something that loss and setback does to us if we stick together, right. If we don't give up, right. And we trust and believe that we're moving forward together. It's because otherwise you can just quit. And that's the flip side, right? And so, I think to have people to point to who can say, look, I know setback. I know failure. And I'm here to tell you, you can make it to the top of the mountain. And here's the people that helped me. And I didn't do it by myself.
Well, I'm going to go. I'm going to switch gears a little bit, if it's okay. I'd like to talk about you, which because I think you've had a really interesting journey. I do. We obviously have a very good common friend here, and so I have known quite a bit about your background and learning more. But you went to law school at Widener. You went and practiced criminal defense law, but I do have to ask you, prior to that, while you were going through law school, can you speak to your bartending experience?
I did. I'm a priest now, so all my buddies, they know my bartending days. They say you probably heard more confessions back then than you did now as a priest. But it's a great, you know, all of our experiences teach us things that we need for life. And I bartended because I needed the money. I was working my way through school. I was working late night shifts, and it was an incredible experience of different kinds of people. As a bartender, a lot of times people will just say things to you that they wouldn't say to somebody else, or they'll say things to the person next to them as if you're not even standing there washing dishes right in front of them. And so you would get this wonderful window into the human condition. Everybody's got a broken heart. Everybody's got a restless heart. Everybody's trying to prove themselves. Everybody has fears. Everybody wants to succeed. I had wonderful experiences with people behind that bar. It helped me as a trial attorney.
Well, that's what I would think so. What are some of the common threads in that?
Sure, you're going in front of a jury, and how do you want your client to come across? Are they relatable? Are they too arrogant? Are they believable? I think because of my days behind the bar, you got to meet a lot of different types of people, and I learned a very valuable skill, and it's something that I hold on to now. It helps me as a minister, and that is the value of listening. You know, everybody wants to talk. Everybody's got something to say. Sometimes we're not in a conversation. We just say something, and the person just doesn't really respond to what you said. They just can't wait to say the next thing that they wanted to say. And so it's not really a dialogue at all. And to be heard, to give somebody the opportunity to vent, to build a relationship, that's when the truth comes out. When you build trust, and people will share with you, maybe some things that they've been wrestling with, but they didn't think anybody cared enough to listen to. To be that person, you've heard it said before. There's a reason why we have two ears and one mouth. Allow yourself the time and the space. Silence is not a real popular word these days. To be silent. The words silent and listen are made up of the exact same letters. You can't have one without the other. Mm. And people, even if you don't have all the answers for them, they will feel like you really helped them because you gave them the opportunity to tell their story. Everybody has a story. And not everybody has the opportunity to share that story because not everybody wants to listen.
You just tied something together for me, going from bartender and listening and sharing things, going to criminal defense where you're representing somebody that has a story, right? Came from an environment, and this is what happened, and there's a story to tell. There's something to listen to, something to discern out of that. And then you go to what you did since you've become, a father and a reverend and a counsel to people in all different walks of life, right? Sounds like there's a strong commonality there.
No doubt. And, you draw upon your experiences, right? So, I didn't think I wanted to be a priest. I didn't go to Villanova to become a priest. My father went to bed one night in his 40s. I was 17 years old, and he had a brain aneurysm, and he never woke up. And it was hard on my mom and my family, but I'll tell you right now, Walt, it was one of the greatest lessons my dad ever could have taught me, and that is life is short, make it count. And so I carry that with me through the rest of my life, and to identify with people who maybe have suffered a premature death or an accident in their family, or a single mother, or difficulty paying the bills. It gives you a certain hopeful empathy and understanding to meet people where they are. And so, some of the more difficult experiences in our life are also the bridges that bond you with other people in your life, teammates, strangers, coworkers, to be able to share your pain. And when you look at somebody in the eye and you can tell that they understand and appreciate, where you've been, that's an incredible gift to be able to offer to somebody. And I think, we talked a lot about mental health and helping people with their struggles, but you have to have that element of trust built, or they're not going to give you the window into their life. And if they sense that you've been there, or that you're not judging them,
Right.
or that you have compassion for the pain that they're in, they will let you in. And now that you're in, you have an opportunity to either help them or to get them to the help that they need.
Well, I'm going to ask you something that Father Rob, that I ask all of our guests, and I think it's an interesting part of the program is, so who has been, and it can be plural, the most inspirational person in your life, and why?
Well, I'll say two people. One, and this might be true for a lot of us, but I will say my mom. I mean, she winds up a single mother of four, in the prime of her life, and went back to work as a secretary. And I think that's a little bit where my faith inspiration came from, because she leaned into her faith. She said her prayers on her knees every morning. She prayed for all of us. We didn't have two nickels to rub together, and she never gave up. And I could see where she was taking her strength from. It was from her relationship with her Lord, and so that rubbed off on me. And so she's in heaven now, but I'm really grateful for the tools that she gave me, and the ability to just look at hardship and not stop, but keep climbing. And the other person, I would throw out there is, his name is Father Bill Atkinson. And Father Bill is an Augustinian brother of mine. He's older than me, passed away in 2006. His first year in the seminary, when he was 18 years old, he was tobogganing down a hill with his friends, other seminarians, and they slammed into a tree down the hill. He was in the front of the toboggan, and he severed his spine, and he was rendered a quadriplegic. And from that moment on, he never walked another day in his life. His brother, Al Atkinson, was a middle linebacker for Villanova, and was drafted by the New York Jets, and was the captain of the defense when Joe Namath was the captain of the offense, and they won Super Bowl III. So Al went on to win the Super Bowl, and Bill went on to spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair. And he petitioned to continue with ordination. And he graduated from Villanova in 6 years, with his family and his friends getting him up every morning, getting him to class. And he was the first quadriplegic ever ordained a priest in the 2,000-year history of our church. He could only move his head and his shoulders. And he was chaplain for the Monsignor Bonner football team. And he was chaplain for the basketball team. And he married a lot of my friends. And he never gave up. And he was just an incredible example of resilience and patience and perseverance. He used to go down the shore and sit on the boardwalk. And if it was a land breeze and he was on the boardwalk by himself, you'd come up and see him, and there'd be like 15 green flies on his face because he couldn't even swat them off. And you'd swat them off, and he'd just smile and say, "Hey, how you doing?" And he didn't complain. He was, there's a book called Green Bananas that somebody wrote, Steve McWilliams wrote about his life. And he said that every morning at 6 a.m., I would wake up under the crushing weight of the cross. And by 6:01, God would send somebody to help me. And so he didn't play the victim card. He lived with hope and joy and peace. And in 2006, he passed away. And now we have since advanced his cause for canonization so that really the whole world can know about his story, because he's an incredible inspiration of faith overcoming obstacles.
So you had two people in your life that went through hardship, and the reason they were as inspiring to you is you saw them go through their hardship, and you saw them give and work through it, you mentioned a couple different types of people in the world, and I do think there's people that are givers and takers, and you had two people go through extreme hardship and they gave. Last one is we've all been through this, and I think people we'd be really interested to hear this, Father Rob. And we've been sitting here talking about how we get people well and some of the dynamics that creates the challenges that creates people that are struggling. And you look back and you look at what you deal with today. You've got a lot on your plate. You look what you've had on your plate, both since you've been with Villanova and since you've go back to your criminal attorney days. How have you handled stress and pressure to kind of what I'd call, let's use the athlete world, optimize your performance? How have you managed that?
It's a great question, man. Appreciate that. Because, as a minister and a priest, I got to do a lot of preaching, and I got to practice what I preach.
Right.
And so everything that we talked about today and more, I have to do myself. I got to surround myself with a team. I gotta check in with people. I got people that hold me accountable. I have a spiritual director that I meet with quarterly to talk about things like this. I'll go to confession to talk about mistakes that I've made. I'd love to read. We talk about people, places, and things. What are you reading? What are you listening to? What kind of music do you listen to? What kind of shows do you watch? What kind of conversations do you engage in? And some of them are uplifting and some of them are not. And I would encourage everyone to stay in those uplifting, spirit-filled, joy-filled, optimistic people in your life. There's a little phrase I like to use, protect, PROTECT. And, I pray, I reflect. From third grade, offer it up. When you have a hardship, offer it up for somebody that has it worse off than you do. T, Thanksgiving. We all have something to be thankful for. E, exercise your mind and your body and your heart. C, check in with somebody else. One of the great pathways out of your own funk, your own depression, is to go check in and see how somebody else is doing. And T, take three deep breaths. So, sometimes when you're in a busy day or before or after a meeting, sometimes it's as simple as just breathing in and breathing out. And so I like that PROTECT as kind of a little set of guardrails for myself as I go through my day and as I end my day.
I love that. Can you do me a favor and send me that when you get a chance? I love that. Well, I've got to tell you, I think the world needs more Father Robs, and the student body, the student athletes at Villanova are all blessed to have somebody like you to engage with and interact with. By reputation, I know you have that way of creating the relationship, helping them, giving an openness, giving your love, without people being judged. And, in the world of this conversation, seeking help, and, whether it's through the faith-based journey or other elements that you can share. So thank you so much for everything you do for these young people and helping them.
Yeah, and for On Balance to have a faith option on the menu, I think is just a wonderful opportunity for the complete wellness that people need these days?
Quite honestly, I just believe, and more importantly, that the people that are out there taking care of people believe that it's an element that can create acute help as well as that, overall long journey. I mean, at the end of the day, if it helps sustain somebody and they don't relapse because of faith and commitment and community, and the bond, it's a beautiful thing, right? Everybody should embrace that. So thank you so much for joining. I appreciate it, Father Rob. Thank you to all of our followers for your continued support. Our objective here is to create awareness with leaders in the collegiate athletic community in particular, so that people seek care. They feel safe. They don't feel the stigma. I mean, ultimately, we'd love to eliminate the stigma here at Athletes on Balance, and hopefully, we're helping some people along the way. Be well, everyone. I'm Walt Norley, and this is Athletes on Balance.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Athletes on Balance. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please follow us on your preferred podcast app to catch our next episode. Join our community by sharing with an athlete, mental health care provider, or coach in your circle.